The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar on imposter syndrome. Am I the only one? This is part of the Boost Your Career webinars that are co-sponsored by Sue Mentors and Tulane University. Today, you'll be hearing from me, Sue Griffey, also known as Sue Mentors. Everybody seems to be talking about imposter syndrome. For the last few years, I've gotten a lot of, I occasionally have mentees even asking me about it, but I do see it in a variety of online places especially. But last year when it made it into the cartoons, I knew that it was a topic that we should deal with as part of the Boost Your Career webinars. So today we're going to go over these topics. How do you define it? Who has it? Do I have it? And what can you do about it? What are some of the solutions? So let's turn to what. This originally was called imposter phenomenon, and that came from an original study that's acknowledged there in the first paragraph in the upper left box by Pauline Clance and Susan Imis in 1978. And at that time, the research was limited to women, or the identification of it was in women. And we'll be talking again a little bit more about this research, but also you'll see reference to an imposter syndrome test, which we'll discuss as well. Interestingly enough, just a couple of days ago in the bottom left, right box was on Twitter a report of a study in the UK about imposter syndrome. Which of course I had to quickly go look at. But here's a succinct way to think about it. Instead of the upper left, which I thought was a little harder for people to realize, anyone who isn't able to internalize their own and own their successes, this tweet quotes Claire Joseph's study, self-doubt is what you can do, imposter syndrome is who you think you are. And it's the feeling of that you really don't know what you know, or you're not worthy of the achievements you have. The Chronicle for Higher Education published an article last October, from Dr. Revoluri about how to overcome imposter syndrome. And this is also pretty succinct. It's not so much what you've done, it has to do with how you feel. And if you're a visual person, I thought this figure from alicialou.me really says it all. What I know versus what other people think I know, what I think other people know, versus what I know and the overlap with what other people know. So whatever works for you to think about it, the definition is pretty solid in terms of it's how you feel and carry forward those feelings into actions that defines imposter syndrome. So who has it? We're going to look at the frequency of it as much as we can determine that. On this slide, the left boxes are some tweets that I had seen in February and March from different healthcare folks I follow on Twitter lists. And so I was going through information and began to see imposter syndrome. People are talking about it. And this was not the topic of what the original tweet was. It was what people were replying to or talking about in situations they've been in. And then I also found that even one of our newest members of Congress, Dr. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, put a tweet out saying occasionally she suffers from it. So it's a big thing, clearly. An interesting report that came out several months ago looking at the sustainability challenges of future human space exploration had a chapter, this was the beginning of the chapter, on imposter syndrome. And the researcher that is discussed here identified imposter syndrome in women and was focusing on women and their place in future human space exploration. So let's turn to the study that I referred to that just came out a few days ago in the late September 2019. This study was done in the UK by a researcher, marketing person, longtime marketing person, Claire Josa, who was looking at the business implications for the UK. What did this mean for businesses? The only thing that was available was a series of slides, and I've used some of them to show her findings. You'll see in the box in the middle of the top of the screen, I put in what they listed as research methods. We know that she had a survey of 2,000 respondents, and we know that they had 50 qualitative interviews, 2 different methods of people that were with and without imposter syndrome. But these people were self-selected, meaning they chose to participate. They found out about the research somehow, got invited, whatever, and they chose to participate. So it's not representative. It's not the same research that you hear that's done when we conduct a national census, or if we talk about the effects of drugs in populations where we have a representative sample. This study is indicative only. And because the full report wasn't available, I don't know what definitions she used or wording and questions, pretty unknown except for a couple slides where I have indications of it. But the reason I want to present these slides, even with all these caveats, is that it does give us an indication to talk about it and see where differences may be by gender, but also for you to understand how many people actually that you probably walk by on a daily basis suffer from it at some point. So her first slide about how big this problem is. 49% male, 52% female. Understand though, this was people who said that they struggled with imposter syndrome regularly or daily in the past year. So that's a large definition in terms of regularly or daily, which means that people were living in it almost constantly in the past year. Again, I don't know the question, but it's important because the original research and for a decade or more after, it was still thought to be focused on women only, that men didn't have it. But we now know that, yes, indeed, men have it almost as much as women do. Another way she has phrased it in these 2 slides, the definition of imposter syndrome in the upper left, it's who you see yourself as being and what do you think you need to actually be doing to lead, meaning the difference of what you can take forward. And then in the bottom right, this is the quote about imposter syndrome versus self-doubt that we saw in the tweet where I referred to this work originally, but just so you understand where this came from. And again, we don't know the questions that were asked to identify her conclusions on this. This slide I like because it shows us differentiation between males and females at what she calls a junior level or a senior level. Please note the bottom right. This is only among people of the 2,000 people who said they knew what imposter syndrome was. Than those who experienced it regularly or daily in the past year. And we saw that same phrase on a previous slide. I will point out that the numbers for the males add up to more than 100%. So that means that we definitely have a situation where people could answer, maybe answered a variety of, had a variety of responses in the same question. But we do see that males have it at the more junior level and females have it at the more senior level. That's the important thing here. And as her conclusion says for males, males feel validated by being promoted, and that seems to reduce or let them actually drop completely their imposter syndrome, where women seem to get it in more senior roles. There's not a lot of validation that that's exactly what happens, but the important thing is for you to understand that it does happen, and it does happen among people both at junior and at senior levels. As you can see, those those numbers, even at junior level, are pretty high for women, approaching 50%. So do you have it? Or do I have it? Well, I tell you I do, because I went back to the original imposter phenomenon test, the Clance IP scale, a 2-page test that you can get online at the URL I've put here. And I took the test and I came out high moderate in the scale. I thought I would be in the moderate range. I didn't realize I still had high moderate. So it was useful for me to think about that. Claire Jose's study showed the kind of answers that people give, or the self-talk that they have, that indicates the difference between self-doubt and imposter syndrome. The last few for me in the teal, all of the ones that are about below 50%, group into feelings that maybe aren't taken forth into actions. Whereas the first one, I'm not as good as others in my field, is more of a comparison question where, and where most of the people answered. She had that at over 70%, closer to 75, 76%. So quite a common statement in however that was phrased. These may have been the actual responses you could choose, or she may have categorized statements into themes, which is one way to do research. The important thing is, if you look at a statement like "I'm not as good as others in my field," many of us will find that we've actually done that, said that to ourselves. And in fact, a week ago, I was working with a mentee, helping her prep for an interview with 2 hiring managers for a job that she really wanted. And we were talking about who the people were she was going to be meeting with. And her comment, after she quickly reviewed and we were looking at the websites of what these people, their backgrounds were, her comment was, "They are so accomplished." And she immediately went into, "I'm not as good as others in my field," even though I look at her and where I was at the same time as she is in her career, and she is incredibly accomplished. So it happens to us, and we don't even realize sometimes when we're saying that to ourselves. If you like visuals, and especially a Venn diagram, this woman, as you'll see in her book cover, she has done a whole book of Venn diagrams. This one I saw on Twitter just a few weeks ago, and it was all about imposter syndrome, so I had to incorporate this into here. And I put a red circle around what she tagged herself as. You can choose what you want. How did I come out? I had to, of course, take this test. I considered that I was successful, but I have my side of still having imposter syndrome. So hopefully this will help you also illuminate it. Back to Claire Jose's research on this in the UK. The 3 boxes that are highlighted in red for me were very important as indications, because they were high numbers for people not moving forward on actions and putting brakes on certain behaviors because of imposter syndrome. So keeping quiet when I knew I had the answers, not going forward for a promotion, not even trying to get a promotion or an award. And a big one that I run into with people that I work with in mentoring, not taking credit for success or claiming it was a team effort. And that, I will say, is a challenge in an environment where it does take a team to do a lot of work, but you still have the expertise and the contributions that you've made that you need to value, and not just put the team's value ahead of you. So all of these are things that aren't just feelings, like the ones that are on slide 7 on the right. The last couple are more feelings. These are actual behaviors that people are using, that inhibit people's ability to move forward in their careers. So let's turn to dealing with it. The article from the Chronicle of Higher Education that I showed you a definition of earlier included quite a long list of ways to deal with imposter syndrome. And I took that list that Dr. Revoluri did, and I reorganized it and recategorized it on 2 slides to try to give you a sense of what she was recommending. This was an article more focused on people in academia, but it definitely has value for all of us in dealing with it. The first thing I called recognizing it, the factors that help contribute. How do you cede authority? The second one are the actual actions you can take. You can change what you do. You can reframe what you do. The last 2, getting rid of, to me, that wasn't a big one. It's the negative, it's a positive action to getting rid of the negative side of comparisons, perhaps. And the last one I called continue to develop. But what I meant by this is these are things you do anyway to continue your own professional development. So I put those in a box specifically to be able to remind you all that part of imposter syndrome is learning to deal with it, but there are also things you need to do that are larger than imposter syndrome. So instead of Dr. Revoluri's very long list, this is the way that I think is the best frame to move it forward. We're going to discuss each of these, and then at the end, I'll put this slide up again so you can just remind yourself or stop on it if you want to copy these down. So the first is just acknowledge it and use this to reframe your language. Hey, I see you. I see imposter syndrome. I know it's there. There was an interesting tweet a week or so ago from this woman who, again, I came across it in something else I was reading. And I thought her definition of a way that she was dealing with it was to call it neutral imposter syndrome. So she still has the feeling, but she's not anxious about it. And that leads us to, how do you take control of it? You take control of it by identifying and recognizing the situations that bring it on for you, usually in work or professional situations, maybe even personal situations. For example, maybe standing up and presenting. That's mine. Mine is, I'm not really comfortable. That's where it comes up for me. But you have to do more than just recognize these situations. You need to actively prepare each time you're going to be in that situation, starting with going back to acknowledging that you have imposter syndrome at that time. Oh, I've got to give a talk tomorrow afternoon to a big group of people. And then begin to reframe your language and identify that you know it exists. How are you going to deal with it? And maybe even go back to that visual of Alicia Liu, who had us understand that we actually know some of what other people know, and a lot of people don't know all that we know and we're presenting. So first, you're going to benchmark your achievements. And when I say personally benchmark, I mean all of your achievements and results, not only your personal ones, but all of them, not just big ones like the goal on the left. Crossing off things on your to-do list are achievements and results, especially if it's submitting a paper, for example. That can be a big goal. For some people, it's a weekly or monthly event, and yet it's a big thing for them to do that. Another way to think about it, and to remind people this isn't just about academia. Here's a freelance writer from an article from almost 5 years ago who was quoted as saying, the best thing you can do is take stock of what you've achieved so far and be proud. So do your own personal benchmarking. And here's one way to think about it. Many of us are knowledge workers. If you're listening to this, it's likely you do a lot of work in the area of knowledge working. We don't produce things on an assembly line. We don't develop products every day before we go home from work. We've had this concept that you can learn more about in previous webinars, and I showed at the bottom of the left screen. You can see the webinar and look it up. But the idea that I have worked with mentees on for several years is that everybody's an innovator. You all are unique, even if you're not a rock star or out there giving a TED Talk. And it's not just, as we said earlier, that you're part of a team and all the colleagues are the same as me. It's what you contribute, the expertise that you have that helps a product be developed or leads the product being developed. So if you think about this, there's a concept I work with mentees on called intellectual property, and that is identifying everything that they produce as knowledge workers to demonstrate the products of your work. So on the right-hand side of the box, you can see this woman reading something on a tablet. Clearly, a report was produced from a lot of data that the person on the left may have been sitting there churning out. That product is intellectual property. If you're a trainer and you conduct trainings all the time, that's your expertise, your ability to conduct successful trainings, to have the collateral materials as well. Writing articles, writing blogs, a variety of ways that you become an everyday innovator. And everyday innovators actually track and identify accomplishments that they have every day. Now, this is my calendar from early September 2019 before I went on vacation. And I actually do record these things on my calendar, that I was recording the webinars that we've been doing and the marketing that I've been doing for it. When you go back and look at it, I can now count up that since mid-August, we're now on our sixth webinar. And suddenly I realized, oh my goodness, look what we did in a month. So going back and identifying those accomplishments every day will help you realize that it doesn't have to be as earth-shaking as writing and publishing a book, for example. And the final one is get an outside perspective. Talk to a mentor, a coach, even a friend or a colleague who's going to give you a listening ear, but also going to give you good feedback. You need a champion on your side. And I don't mean a rah-rah champion. I mean someone who's going to tell it like it is and help you understand, is it imposter syndrome? Is it self-doubt? Are you over or undervaluing yourself? Whatever question you take forward. Here's a tweet I found that really shows what it means to have someone outside you, your outside perspective, actually validate what you feel as imposter syndrome but isn't true. So just because it's obvious to you doesn't mean it's obvious to anyone else. And this woman was saying her dissertation supervisor was right about that. So this is another way, another step in helping you reframe your language and your own inner talk. So again, in review quickly, 4 steps. Acknowledge it. Take control of it in the situations where you know it's going to occur. Prepare for it by personally achieving your, benchmarking your achievements, and keep that going on so you recognize and build up that base of work that you've been doing, and get an outside perspective. For those that want to delve into more of the research that started all of this, you can look at these 3 studies. I put the abstracts up here and the URLs for you to find them. This is foundational research. It's a very interesting topic, and there's a lot to be said beyond the articles and the tweets that I'm showing you here. So in summary, a lot of people have imposter syndrome, but it only matters if you think you have it. And if you think you have it, acknowledge it, take control of it so it doesn't control you. Get perspective from someone else, a champion that's on your side. And remember that it might not go away, but you definitely can put the inner voice into the background in your mind. As always, thanks for attending our webinar today. Don't forget to check the channel that we have for many other Boost Your Career webinars, as well as other professional development webinars from the Tulane Alumni Career Services Office. Please contact Sarah or Sue for more information on this topic or about ideas you have on another webinar you'd like.